Hello and welcome to Melee's Turn Wheel, the series that takes a retroactive look at the Fire Emblem series chapter by chapter. I'm your host, I'm Melee Kirby, and today we're taking it back to chapters 3:12, 3:13, and 3 Endgame of Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn. Now, I'm just going to be fully transparent with you guys. I am in that state of mind that I get in usually towards the end of when we get through one of these games, where I just want to play the damn video game. So I'm going to probably, hopefully at least, be getting these episodes out at a faster rate. It might be a pipe dream. I'm gonna set the goal of at least getting through the chapters of FE10 before Fortune's Weave comes out, which would require me to put out an episode, I don't know, about every week and a half. I don't know how realistic that is, but I am willing to try. And to that end, I'm recording this episode only. It hasn't even been. It's Sunday morning. I put out the last episode like late Friday night, like past midnight. So I guess it would have been Saturday morning. So I'm not expecting. It would have been unreasonable to expect anybody to get any of their answers into the question I asked last time with this short of a turnaround. So I'm going to put those in editing, and that would probably be right now. Okay, so I did get some responses, and I'm going to talk about those now. As a reminder, the question was, which route in Fortune's Weave are you most excited for, looking forward to, that you think you'll enjoy the most, whatever. Via email from Darkray, for Fortune's Weave, thinking Theodora. She seems like the most interesting, having an empire behind her, but needing the games for legitimacy. Seems interesting how that'll all connect. Pretty fair. Personally, I think Theodora is the one that I'm looking forward to the least, just because she doesn't seem like the type of character who has like a personality that I would really mesh with. I'll have to see for sure. And I'm definitely, I'm going to play through all of them, and I'm looking forward to all of them. I think there's a lot of potential for Theodora's route to be good. She just doesn't really seem like my type of character, just on a surface level. From Drano on Blue Sky, Dietrich, Lord Love a Dracula. He does, in fact, look like Alucard from Castlevania. I am far, far, far from the first person to point this out, but it is pretty funny. He's very Castlevania-coded in general, is the impression that I get from people who have more experience with Castlevania than I do. I've never actually played a Castlevania game. I've only watched the Netflix series, which has had mixed response, so I don't even know if that's a good benchmark. But yeah, that's the limit of my experience with Castlevania. Dietrich does seem cool, though. I'm excited to see sort of how I'm hoping that he's very deranged and unhinged. And if he is, then he might actually end up being my favorite of the four at the end of the day. But we'll see. And then via comment from Solaris, Theodora, no further comments, Your Honor. All four lords look really interesting, though. And yes, the elephant in the room is that Theodora is, both of the female lords, and then depending on your taste, I suppose, the adult male lord all of them are very attractive, is my point. Other than Kai, who's obviously a child. But yeah, Theodora in particular, I think people are very thirsty for, which I assume is what is meant to be implied here. If not, then sorry for jumping to conclusions, but I think that is the idea. And then finally from Josh Jansen, Leda first, but Theodora is my second for obvious reasons. Again, I presume alluding to the thirst, or not. I don't know. But that's where my head immediately goes. So maybe that shows where my head is at more than anything else. So for me, I'm going to be the odd one out. I'm thinking that I'm going to enjoy Kai route the most. Just like for the story, more so than anything else. I think Kai, I like the idea of him being like this very happy-go-lucky protagonist. One of the younger protagonists in the series, which I do tend to enjoy. I think Leaf is a great protagonist. I think Roy is a great protagonist. So I think the stories with the younger lords tend to work out pretty well. I love the idea of him being like this kid, and then he gets his other two friends who are also kids to to join up with him for this, and then they have like the only other character about from Kai Route that we know about, I think, is that one woman who the three children just walk up to her and recruit her, and I my headcanon, I guess until the game comes out, it has to be headcanon, is that she's like, why are these three children doing this on their own? I need to like go look after them a little bit, which I think just has the potential to be a really fun dynamic. Based on what we've heard from some of the newer sources on Fortune's Weave, it seems like Kai Route might be the easiest. That might be intended as like the starting route, or the route for beginners or something like that. Which, if that's true, then I'm not expecting the gameplay to be great. But hopefully the story will be able to carry it for me. The other one that I'm thinking about, and until I learned that we weren't going to have to choose, I was probably going to leave Kai out to dry, because the more we learned about the characters that would be in Lada's route, the more I'm like, all right, man, you might be going on without me, Kai. I don't know. I don't really have much interest in Leda herself. I'm sure she'll be like a perfectly good character that I'll enjoy. But between Shirako and then later Olympia was the 1-2 combo that I needed to be like, oh boy, all right. But now that I don't have to choose, I'm probably going to start with Kai Route, and then go from there. Probably do Lada's route next, or maybe I'll do Leda and then Kai. I don't know. Just some combination of those two, I think, are the ones that I'm the most interested in. Kai for the protagonist and for the story, and then Leda route for the characters that are locked to her chapters. The question this time around is pretty easy for me, because I always like to tie it into something that we're talking about during the actual episode, if possible. And this time around, for no particular reason, what is your favorite chapter in all of Fire Emblem? If you have one off the top of your head, maybe rattle off a couple if it's between, a few for you guys. I'm very curious to see what people's choices are, because we are, as I'm alluding to, coming up on my favorite chapter in the series during this episode, and I am very excited to talk about it. I'm in a little bit of a weird spot, because I'm recording this part after doing the whole rest of the episode, so I already know what I said about the chapter in question, and honestly, it was less exciting than I expected it to be, but I think it's because, circumstances of the chapter and then stuff I've talked about in previous episodes. I think I ended up not wanting to repeat myself too much, so it might feel a little bit anticlimactic, but I can assure you that it is absolutely my favorite chapter to play through in this series that we're coming up on in this episode. So look forward to that as you go through the rest of the episode. And let me know, as always, turnwellpodcast@gmail.com. I'm a Melee Kirby on Blue Sky and Twitter, or leave a Spotify comment, or comment on your listening platform of choice if it allows for it. All right, back to the rest of the episode. Okay, I think I'm just about ready to get into the chapters for the episode. Before we start, though, I wanted to say something sort of at the top here relating to kind of how I feel about this episode. I guess I'll feel it out as we go. If you remember last episode, I had said that I was excited because this is the first episode, and I think the only episode in literally the entire game where we don't get any new recruitable characters, which is true, unless I'm really forgetting about something, but I don't think I am. Now, as if to punish me for my hubris, the game said, yeah, sure, you won't have to talk about any characters, but we're going to give you the most densely packed, complex story beats to go over since, like, part 2, maybe even, like, middle of part 1, I don't know. But there's a lot of story in these 3 chapters, guys, like, a lot. So, like, to the point where I'm questioning whether I should even try to summarize, like, all of it. I'm gonna go out on a limb and assume that most people, at the very least, who are listening to this have played Radiant Dawn. So I don't know how much my story summaries, especially when I get into like super deep nitty gritty, I don't know how much that like really helps people. I'm going to try my best to summarize at least, well, at the very least, I'm going to summarize the big overarching story beats. There are like a lot of little details that I think are important, definitely worth mentioning, but I might sort of skim past them or skip over them completely, especially if there's, like, maybe it would make more sense to lump them in with some stuff that happens at the beginning of part 4. Like, for example, just off the top of my head, we get a little bit of Nesala content in the very end of this episode. In 3E, Nesala shows back up. And there's some scenes with him and Tibarn and Rayson and all that. But it's not a lot, and we're going to get a lot more from him at the beginning of part 4. Literally the first chapter of part 4 is going to talk about that a little bit more. So it may be worth it to save Nesala, talking about Nesala until later. I think that's probably what I'm going to do for situations like that. But we'll see, I just don't want this episode to be like 3 hours long, is the gist of it here. Although with how much rambling I'm doing, it's going to hit that anyway. So I think you guys get the point. Let's go ahead and start with our chapters for the episode, starting with chapter 3-12, The Price. So the idea here is that in order to get to Benyan, or at least the route that they've decided to take to get to Benyan, goes through Dane. And Sanaki is... she's given them... You're going to see this throughout these 3 episodes, right, guys? Is that they are really trying, they being Ike and Sanaki and all them, to not fight Dane. They don't want to fight Dane for, because they don't want to see war and bloodshed, but also because they can't really afford to waste their fucking time on this, right? Like, they really just want to pass through Dane to get to Benyan and fight the senators. That's all that they want to do. So they're going to give Dane many, many, many chances to not continue the fighting. But for reasons that are still unknown to us at this point, Peleus, and by extension Dane, will not back down. They're like, no, we are fighting Benyan, or we are fighting, the Laguz Alliance, Crimea, and Sanaki, no matter what. At this point, it's still unknown, although we are about to find out in very short order. Because we have now shifted perspective back to Micaiah, and the rest of the Dane squad. And if you remember, at the end of last episode, we got a scene where Micaiah was, overexerting herself and she passed out. And she's still suffering the ramifications from that. I guess she's had healers called, and they tell her that she needs to rest and not extend herself any further than she already has. But Peleus is like, okay, great. When can you be back on the battlefield? We need you so that the soldiers will keep fighting. And this just about is the last straw for Soth. Soth has been putting up with Micaiah being put in these dangerous situations because it's what she wanted, and she, and to an extent Soth, thought that is what is best for Dane. But seeing that Peleus doesn't appear to care that much about her well-being, Soth decides to threaten Peleus to start, and then basically say, I'm taking Micaiah and we are leaving. And even Torineo is like, yeah, Peleus, we've asked enough of Micaiah. Like, can we please just let her do her thing for now? And Peleus gets on his knees and begs them, no, Micaiah needs to stay because we need to keep fighting this war at all costs. And it's at this point that the reasoning for Peleus's and Dane's strange behavior comes to light. Now, I'm going to get pretty thoroughly into my opinions on all this, but for right now, I'm just going to state the facts of what happens, all right? So we get a flashback. So first of all, Peleus comes clean to the others with some pushing from his mother, Almeida, to admit that he has been tricked into signing a blood pact. And we get a sort of flashback to him finding out this information for the first time. I don't know. There's some weird wording here that kind of obfuscates when exactly this happens. Because the flashback shows Peleus meeting with Lacane. And Lacane asks for Dane's help in the war. But the wording that he uses, Lacane, he says that Sanaki is a false apostle, is raising an army and is marching on us, etc. When at the time that this flashback should have taken place, it would have been before Sanaki, was freed from prison. So I think that's probably just like a translation error or something. I'm like pretty sure that this flashback is supposed to be taking place before the events of like 3-6 and all that, when Sanaki was still imprisoned, and it was just the Laguz alliance that Benyon was fighting against. I think the localizers probably maybe it isn't a localization error. Maybe the writers just got their shit mixed up. I think it's probably, though, that the localizers got confused and didn't realize that this was a flashback, and just messed up the wording because they thought it was happening like right now, which is kind of silly and embarrassing a little bit if you ask me, but hey, people make mistakes, it's fine. So in this flashback, Lacane and by extension Peleus in the present, they explain exactly what a blood pact is and how it works. If you sign a blood pact and then you break the terms of the blood pact, and a sort of wave of death will ripple through whatever country is affected by the blood pact. It seems to exclusively work on nations, although it's not. Okay, nope. Sticking to the facts. We'll get into that later. The way it's explained is that he gives an example of a country that signed a blood pact with the Senate. And then they broke the terms of that contract, and then, one person died on the first day, 2 people died on the second day, then 3 on the third day, etc., etc., etc. And eventually, the king of that country decided to beg for forgiveness from the Senate and start working with them and obeying the terms of the contract again. And it's not... The country in this example isn't given a specific name. We have a few options for what it could be. One possibility is that it's a country that doesn't exist anymore. We know that Benyon is one of the oldest countries in the entire history of Teleus. So if the Senate, as a construct goes back that far, then it may be that the country that he's talking about here doesn't exist anymore. The CG and art used in this flashback, to my eye anyway, it looks like because it shows people lying dead on the ground. It kind of looks like they have wings, which makes me think that it might be Kilvis. I don't remember the specifics of Nesala's blood contract, because we're going to find out later that Nesala, the reason that Nesala betrayed everybody is that he has a blood pact with the Senate as well, and so he couldn't disobey the Senate at all and had to betray everybody. So it may be talking about Kilvis, and they've just been in a blood pact arrangement with the Senate for that long, but we may find out later that that's not true. I don't know. So that's how a blood pact works, and the reason that Peleus was tricked into signing it is because he trusted Izuka to read through the terms of the contract. He thought that he was signing a treaty after his coronation as king. He was signing a treaty with Benyon or something to that effect. And he had Izuka look through it, and Izuka's like, yep, this looks fine. And so he signed it. But it turns out that, believe it or not, oh no, who could have seen this coming? Izuka betrayed him, and is actually in the Benyon Senate's pocket. Now, one thing that's important to flag up here, because it's going to come up again later, is that Almeida seems to know more than she's letting on. She's the one who first makes the assumption, because Peleus doesn't come right out and say it. He's kind of like beating around the bush a little bit. And Almeida straight up asks him, did you make a blood pact? Like, she knows the term. She's the one who initiates this conversation. She also seems to know enough about a blood pact that he should have a mark on somewhere on his body, which he does show, in fact, and in fact, he does have it. No one really clocks this at the time, but it's a couple chapters later when they're like, oh wait, Almeida might have more information, but it's just important to make sure that that's known now. And so now that everybody's on the same page and they're all like, fuck, we got to figure out what to do. So their plan for the time being is to just keep doing what the Senate wants, right? Because they don't really have any other choice. The second that they break the terms of the contract, which it seems to just be do whatever the Senate says, the second that they go against that, every single person in Dane will die and the country will be destroyed. So they have to keep playing ball for the time being. But Micaiah suggests that while they're sort of buying time and preventing the Senate from activating the Blood Pact, Peleus does research to figure out how to break the terms of the contract. Because, he's just so like deep in his despair right now that it didn't even occur to him that there was anything he could do. He was just about ready to give up, essentially. Okay, and that's all the facts of the situation laid out. Now let's talk about it, right? Because this is a widely reviled plot point. Many would consider it to be not only the worst aspect of the story between both Teleus games, some would even go as far as to say that it is one of the worst writing decisions in the entire series. And there are many valid reasons for thinking so. It's an incredibly contrived mess of an idea that's foreshadowed a little bit, but definitely not well enough. And it just comes across like a really lazy justification to have the two sides of the war in conflict with each other. Like, they came up with the premise of, we're going to have two protagonists in this game, and we're going to have them come into conflict with each other towards the middle of the game. How do we do that? And it feels like they worked their way backwards from there to arrive at a really flimsy justification for having Micaiah and Ike fight each other, basically. Now, the blood contract idea, or the blood pact, I keep calling it blood contract when it's actually called the blood pact. The blood pact idea has been a little bit alluded to since Path of Radiance. We know in Path of Radiance that there was that conversation explaining sort of how Ashnerd came to power under mysterious circumstances where a lot of the maybe more legitimate heirs to the throne died. And we also know that there's been some shit going on with Naysala and Kilvis for a little bit that may or may not be related to the blood contract. It's unclear. So it's obvious that they've had some thoughts about this setup, bouncing around in there since Path of Radiance. But it's very unclear to what degree they knew the specifics of what they were going to do, how the blood contract worked. I give up. I'm just going to call it the blood contract, and how it would be implemented into the story of the game. If they had that planned out from Path of Radiance, then you could have fooled me, right? Like, it's handled pretty poorly, I would argue, in a couple different ways. Now, here's the thing. Do I think that this completely ruins Radiant Dawn's story? No, I don't. And that is somewhat of a bold take, I would say, because there are like a good number of people who would say yes, absolutely it does. And I think that that's going a bridge too far, which is funny because that's what I named the last episode. Maybe I should have named this one a bridge too far. The main complaints rather that I see about the blood contract in this game are twofold, or they can fall under two distinct categories. One is that the blood contract is very contrived. The mechanics of how it works are very poorly explained and hand-wavy, and that it doesn't really make sense if you think about it from like a logical perspective, right? And I agree with that completely. I could not agree more, in fact. The concept of a blood contract as a piece of world building is so all over the place. It's a mess. You know, there's no explanation given for why so few people seem to know about it, but yet it seems to be such a like, why is it such a closely guarded secret of what a blood contract is? How did Ashnerd find out about it? How did the Senate find out about it? Who invented the idea? You know, why does nobody say or explain anything? Is that part of the contract? If so, then you would think that, like, surely someone would have just figured it out at some point, right? Yeah, and these are all questions that I think are pretty easy to, like, create satisfying answers to. Here's an idea, as I was playing the chapter, an idea that came across my mind. You know, maybe this could be workshopped a little bit, because I don't think it's perfect by any means. But what if this is, like, very ancient, like, Lagu's blood magic that only the dragons had access to, and the way that Ashnerd found out about it is because Almeida told him about it. I think that could be really interesting in a couple ways. I think Almeida isn't a particularly compelling character. I think this could have added some depth to her, because if she explained to Ashnerd how a blood contract worked, if it was like some forbidden magic that nobody had ever used or heard of in, like, you know, thousands of years, but she let the information leak because she was in love with Ashnerd or something like that, and then it came back around to bite her in the ass when it's being used by the Senate against her son. I think that could be like a cool moment of reflection for her, right? Now, as for how the Senate would have found out about it, I mean, that one's a little bit trickier. I think maybe you could say that, you know, they just kind of investigated the situation with Ashnerd's ascension to the throne and, like, put two and two together. Or maybe because I believe they say at some point in one of the base conversations, I don't know. I think they say at some point that Goldoa and Benyon used to be the two oldest nations in the world, and it used to only just be those two. So maybe if Goldoa had access to this type of magic, maybe Benyon did as well, and seeing Ashnerd use it reminded them, like, oh, hey, yeah, we have that as well. Something like that. I don't know. Any amount of explanation given for why it's being used so willy-nilly, but yet also such a big secret, I think would have gone a long way. Also, why, can it only be made with kings? Like, maybe there's some sort of magic in the bloodline of kings that requires it to work, because could you just make a blood contract with any random fucker on the street, and then everybody in that guy's country would die? Or is it, like, proportional to the amount of people that person, like, cares about and is invested in protecting, which is why it's most effective on kings, because theoretically they would want to protect their whole country. Like, just give us something, right? Like a little bit of an exposition dump about the nature of the magic at work here. And I think it would have been fine. I think that would have been, like, perfectly good enough to explain its usage and make it feel a lot less contrived and hand-wavy. Now, the other complaint I hear about the Blood Pact is that it provides a really simple and convenient excuse to bring the heroes in conflict with each other, rather than creating a more interesting or compelling reason. Now, this is the aspect of the criticism that I do not agree with, because I want you to stop and think for a second, guys. Obviously individual opinions may differ, and maybe the temperature of the fan base has changed since I was more engaged, because I haven't actually talked in like online Fire Emblem spaces in a really long time. But last I checked, the Kumu archetype of character, the guy from most games who is like a good guy, quote unquote, deep down, but he's fighting for his country out of a sense of loyalty, even though he knows he's doing the wrong thing. Aren't those guys like almost universally like hated and thought to be really stupid, poorly written characters that aren't compelling for the most part? Like, I thought that was the thing, right? Is that making a character who's supposed to be a good person, right? Like, and wanting us to be invested in the idea that they are like, oh, we're not so different, you and I. And it's like, it's a tragedy that they're on the opposite side of this conflict. How many times has that actually worked and felt like legitimately interesting and compelling? Because I can tell you, up to this point in the series, we've seen what? We've seen Eldegon, we've seen Ishtar, we've seen Reinhardt, we've seen like I don't know, maybe Brunya would count, or Gale, I guess, from FE6. Who is like Linus and Lloyd from FE7, and then Selena and Bryce from FE8 and 9 respectively, right? How many Bryce stands are there, guys? How many like, I guess Eldegon's fairly popular. I hate Eldegon, but I how many, like, is Reinhardt, like, do people really like Reinhardt for his writing? I mean, I know he's like the funny haha heroes man, or at least he was a long time ago. But do people really think like, oh yeah, Reinhardt's like this banger character, man? I really like how he's like he's just refusing to come over to the good guy's side because he's an enemy lieutenant, but we're supposed to care about him and think that like, oh man, if only circumstances were different, we could have been the best of friends. Like, this shit doesn't work well in most circumstances, right? Because the idea of two characters or two groups of characters that are good but come into conflict, it's inevitably going to lead to questions being asked. Questions like, why is one side fighting for, as long as they continue to have clear-cut ideas of good and evil in the series, right? Which they, for all the talks about, the series dabbles in gray morality, right? Like, and I don't think that's always very successful, but you have to admit that at least, it's at least good to try to move beyond the scope of one side is doing literal child hunts where they kidnap and sacrifice children to a demon god, and then one side is not doing that. But we're supposed to believe that there's heroes on both sides, right? Some people on the opposing side is just the victims of circumstance. Like, come on, it's if they're invested in the idea of Micaiah being a good person at her core, which they clearly are. I mean, obviously, in the previous chapters, and then even especially in some of the upcoming chapters, she does some questionable things. The story makes it pretty clear that she's a good person with a kind heart. I mean, obviously, Soth wouldn't stand beside her, or at least he wouldn't care for her or respect her as much as he does. So they were in this scenario where they had to think of a good reason why someone like Micaiah would stand against the clearly morally correct and superior side of the conflict. And how many people listening right now think that they could have come up with something that was like significantly better? Like, seriously. Maybe I'm not giving the writers enough credit, but I truly, from the bottom of my heart, don't think that they would have come up with anything different from this that wouldn't have felt just as forced or unnecessary, or possibly even more. If you want to argue that maybe Micaiah shouldn't have been written to be so nice. Like maybe she should have been a little bit more, a little bit more morally dubious. Then that's like a separate argument that's kind of outside the scope of this discussion. Is maybe they should have written the protagonist to be a worse person, which I mean I guess could be interesting. So no, I don't agree with this aspect of the Blood Pact criticism. In fact, if anything, I think it helps to make Micaiah an even more interesting character than she would have been otherwise. Because she is put in such an impossible situation, it forces her to make a choice between her morals, her principles, and the lives of people that she really cares about. I guess the implied issue with this that I don't know if I've ever seen anybody say it explicitly, but I think the idea here is that, oh, of course, she wouldn't sacrifice all of Dane, for, to be on the right side of the conflict. That's not an interesting moral question because nobody would do that in her situation. And that's just not true. Like, they go over this a couple times in these upcoming chapters. They float, Soth wants to just get the fuck out of Dodge. He's like, I don't care if it's true or not. I'm taking you and we're leaving. And he has to be convinced to not do that. And, just at some point, Torineo and Soth are shooting the shit. And Torineo kind of just casually floats the idea of, if you leave, if you decide to say, fuck Dane, we're leaving and we're joining up with Ike, would they still count as being from Dane for the purposes of the Blood Pact? And Torineo's not stupid, right? He knows what he's doing, right? He's trying to give them an out, or at least entertaining the idea of an out, right? But Soth, being convinced by Micaiah that it's the right thing to do, decides, no, we're gonna stick around and see this through to the end. And I don't know, that to me is a lot more interesting of a moral dilemma than, oh, I don't wanna fight this war, but I have to for loyalty, or I love the king, or I love Ishtar, or some vague concept of bad things might happen to my kids. I don't know. Maybe this is my own bias showing, because I have never liked the Camus archetype characters in these games. I just don't think it's a compelling or interesting idea. So I think dropping all pretense and saying, okay, we're going to give Micaiah an actually valid reason to do the things that she's doing, I think it works. It's not the best these games have ever been written, right? I certainly, as I said, I do completely agree with the criticism of the Blood Pact being too convoluted, being too contrived, and not making any sense in the world building. But for the scenarios that it leads our characters into, I think it actually works pretty well. So that's my hot take for you. I don't think the Blood Contract is the worst thing to ever exist. I think it would have been way less interesting if they had tried to contrive some other reason why Micaiah fights with Dane, despite it being the wrong thing to do, because they have a track record of it going extremely poorly when they try to do that. And I'm glad that they didn't bother. I'm really glad that they didn't. I'm just going to be honest with you guys. All right. I think I've made my case about as well as I possibly could have, more or less. The long and short of it is that I understand why people hate this part of the story, but I don't think it's that bad. I think it's bad. I think it's pretty bad, but I don't think it's that bad. That's the gist. And it's fine if you don't agree, but that's how I feel. It is definitely the biggest mark that I have against this game's writing. I'll say that much. I agree with that completely. Anyway, enough about the Blood Pact. Let's start talking about the base. So we got some cool items in the bargain shop. First of all, we get another beast killer. Now, I actually don't recommend that you pick this one up, because the only map left in the game where we're going to be fighting Laguz with Soth is 313. That's like the last one left. And I mean, it's not like Soth is going to be, soloing that map by himself or anything. If you don't still have like most of your beast killer uses left, then I would be a little bit surprised. I guess you can pick this one up here if you like really want it. You could also theoretically give it to Volk. If you put it in the convoy, Volk can grab it. Or I guess Heather, for that matter, can grab it and use it against the Lagus in the Alencia Swamp map in Part 4. But that's the only other use case for it I can really see. The other thing that I wanted to make note of here is pretty interesting. This playthrough is actually the first time that I purchased this. It is a crossbow called the Taksh. I have no idea how I'm supposed to say that. It's spelled Taksh. So yeah, I'm not sure. But crossbows, as I've talked about, are pretty niche as far as your usage of them goes. I don't think they're very good in the hands of the player, despite them being really annoying in the hands of the enemies. But I actually did grab it this time around, and let me tell you, I would probably recommend it moving forward. I might start getting them in my playthroughs moving forward, if you have the money to spare, because there are some flying enemies that are really annoying to deal with in these upcoming chapters. There's the Pegasus Knights in 312, and then the Hawk Lagus in 313. So it's and then in general, it just like does decent damage against enemies that just normal enemies that you're fighting. It's definitely not as effective as using like a melee weapon or like the Tarvos or whatever. But it can still come in handy. I gave it to Nolan. You could theoretically also give it to Leonardo. I tried. I thought that you could just use them if you could use bows. But no, Leonardo is not able to use them. I guess you have to be tier 2 to use them. I'm pretty sure snipers can use them. Yeah, almost definitely. So I think you might just need to be might just need to be a sniper rather than an archer. It definitely came in handy for me a couple times throughout these maps. We have some base conversations. One of them is a conversation between Torneo and Soth. And Torneo gives Soth a pair of boots, saying that he was saving them as like a parting gift when he and Micaiah left, but wanted him to have them now, since it seems like they're going to be sticking around for a while longer. Obviously, boots are very good, one of the best stat boosters in the game. I don't know who I'm going to give mine to be perfectly honest with you, and I should probably make up my mind about that at some point soon. I've been my final team for the tower is a little all over the place right now, because they're split across different armies, so I need to like kind of put my head together, or well, I guess use my head a little bit to figure out who I want to give each of the stat boosters to, because I still have like a speed wing. I think I have 2 angelic robes, so I got some stat boosters I got to distribute at some point. Maybe Volu could use like a no, I don't. Do I have a Draco Shield? I might have given my Draco Shield to Volug. That might have been what I did. There is a conversation between Nolan and Soth, and this one does give you something. It gives you a Tomahawk for Nolan to use. But the real reason that I made note of it is because the conversation here is pretty interesting. Soth talks to Nolan, and Nolan can tell that Soth has something on his mind, having just learned about the Blood Pact. Nolan doesn't know. The only people who know about the Blood Pact at this point are Peleus, obviously, Almeida, Micaiah, Soth, and Torneo. I think those are the only people. So the average person in the army has no idea what's going on. Even like Zehark, and if Jill was still here, Jill wouldn't know either. And it seems like Soth is really considering telling Nolan in this conversation. Nolan can tell that something's up, and he's like, don't force it. If you feel like telling me later, you know where to find me. And I just think that's like a really cool... it also mentions that Nolan reads a lot, which is like a piece of characterization that we're getting about him for the first time. So, I don't know, just the implication that, first of all, getting a little bit more about Nolan, which is nice, and then the implication that Soth trusts Nolan so much that he's the only person outside of the people who already know that we see, at least, Soth like seriously like have to stop and think like, should I tell Nolan? Like he doesn't do that with any of the people he fought with in Path of Radiance or anything like that. It really seems like he just has that level of trust in Nolan, which is cool. I want the backstory on these guys so badly. I think it's in like supplementary materials and stuff, but nothing presented in game as far as I'm aware anyway. The final base conversation that I made a note of here is Nico shows up. I don't It's Nico. It's literally the same kid every time, no matter the circumstances. He just keeps popping back up to remind Micaiah that yes, she does indeed fight for the people of Dane. I don't know why they felt like this was necessary to do a second time as a base conversation, I think, because obviously there's the bit at the beginning of the game that's part of the story, and then I think there's a base conversation with him in like towards the end of part 1. And then they fucking do it again. Like, I have this is veering into like crackpot conspiracy theory territory, but I think the writers really wanted to include a kid, to make it so like the audience still remembers that like Dane has good people in it, because if you remember, like there's been a lot of talk from like the Dane soldiers and the Dane adults of like, oh yeah, we're gonna kill all the subhumans, you know. And if I wouldn't blame the writers if they thought the player base was gonna get here, see that Micaiah was so dedicated to protecting the people of Dane and being like, why? There's such assholes. They're all such terrible people. So they're like, shit, we gotta throw in the kid one last time to make people feel sympathetic for the people in Dane. Which is, you know, fair enough, I guess, because the adults in Dane are pretty shitty, it must be said, but I am with Micaiah on this one, that I don't think that necessarily means that they should all die. You know, especially since maybe there are some that aren't so bad. You know, who knows? It seems like there are. Micaiah seems to think that there are. That's another thing that I think kind of goes back to what I was talking about the Blood Pact earlier, right? The reasons that Micaiah wants to protect Dane aren't like super altruistic. I mean, they kind of are, right? You know, she wants to save people's lives, sure. But like, she knows how terribly the people treat Laguz, and how terribly they would probably treat her if they knew she was a branded. But the reasons that she wants to save everybody, in Dane specifically, and will kill a lot of people to make that happen, is the reasons are very personal to her, right? Like she had positive experiences with these people, and she is a true patriot of Dane, right? It's not like, oh, I'm such a nice, kind-hearted person that I don't want to see anybody die. She tries to light I'm getting ahead of myself. She tries to light people on fire in this next chapter. Like, she's not a freaking, like, goody two-shoes who's just doing all this out of the kindness of her heart. She's loyal to Dane in the same way that a Camus archetype is, but they make it way more believable, in my opinion. I don't know. I'm starting to come around on this, guys. I don't know. Maybe the blood contract isn't so bad after all. But yeah, anyway, seeing Nico just really, like, sort of helps Micaiah to steel her resolve that, like, we're going to help Dane no matter what, you know, by any means necessary, as we're going to see. Okay, so this is where we get into the map properly. The plan here is that a decoy force, they're using their own decoy force this time. They don't actually say this anywhere, but I like to think that they got the idea from what Ike has done to them in the past. With the decoy force to get across the river. It's just a nice little touch, I guess, if that's what the intention is. But the decoy force that they're using is engaging Ike, and sort of they're anticipating that Sanaki will be sent sort of on a more roundabout path through this canyon that they're overlooking. And so they're going to ambush them and shove rocks down on them. There are some comments made about how this is like a particularly sneaky or underhanded tactic. I guess they may be referring to what comes later with the oil, but it sounds, the way it's phrased in this cutscene makes it sound like they're talking about the concept of a decoy and an ambush, which, I don't know, that seems pretty straightforward. In fact, I think we used a similar tactic in one of the chapters in part 1, but I don't know, just weird phrasing. Okay, and that's where the map begins. We are situated on a cliff, and overlooking the enemies. Mostly Benyon and some Crimea forces. It's all Beorc this time. There's no Lagus at all, which is a nice change of pace from 3.6, I guess, the last time we were playing as the Dawn Brigade. There is a path over on the right side that leads up the cliff that enemies can come up and fight us on. And there's also a ledge on the left side that we can use to sort of prevent people from coming up in that direction. Now, the goal of the map is to kill a certain number of enemies. I think it's like 30 or 40, something like that. I don't actually care for this map very much, to be honest with you. I think there's a couple reasons behind that. First of all, the yellow units in this map, whereas in 3.6, I think they were pretty helpful, and they helped, take some of the pressure off of your weaker units. In this chapter, I don't feel like they do much of anything. They kind of just get in the way of helping. They get in the way of your choke points. They get in the way of like fighting on the ledge. And they take so goddamn long to run around and do everything that they're going to do. So I usually just have them all either target a specific location, or I just have them stand still, which is a little bit unfortunate because there are some instances where I would like for them to attack some of the enemies, like especially with the Pegasus Knights. But they don't usually cooperate even when I do want them to do that. So it ends up just kind of being tedious and frustrating to watch those guys like run around and do their thing. There are rocks on this map overlooking the cliff that you can push down at the enemies, similarly to the rocks in that one chapter of Path of Radiance. Whereas in that one, we were climbing up the mountain and had to be wary of the rocks being used on us. This time, we get to go on the offensive with the rocks. The problem is that they're not particularly useful. They only do 10 damage to an enemy, and you can hit multiple at once. So there's a lot of potential damage that you can do in sort of one fell swoop. But it's not going to end up really mattering, especially since they can heal either using vulneraries, or they can get healed by like a bishop or whatever. There's a bishop with a physics staff that's really annoying. So I don't find them particularly fun or useful. I usually just ignore them personally. I do like the ledge over on the left side, and this is something that is another example. We're going to see this a lot more in 3.13, and I'm going to have a lot to say about it then. But I'll mention it here to start off because it's utilized a little bit here as well. In 3-6, we saw choke points being used as a method of sort of funneling the enemies in a way that made it easier for our weaker units to contribute. Characters like, maybe that we haven't put as much experience into, can reliably only fight one enemy at a time, and deal with it that way. In this map and in 3.13, the ledges, when we're on the high ground, which we are here, they give us a huge advantage in terms of hit and avoid, making it, further increasing the survivability of some of our units. It's not going to help units that are still at like their base level. Like for me, I have like Leonardo, Meg, Fiona that just don't, they're barely, they've barely been leveled at all. So they're still going to get their asses beat. But characters like, Nolan and Zehark, who are, a little bit stronger, but maybe not strong enough to take on all these enemies reliably, can use the ledges to their advantage. Which is an aspect of this map that I like, even if I think it's done to much better effect in 3.13 than it is in this map. But it's still worth mentioning. There is one thing about this map that I really don't like. So starting off, there are a couple of Pegasus Knights on the map that can sort of bypass the cliff and fly straight up. Those guys don't really bother me so much because they're fairly easy to avoid as long as you're keeping an eye on them, just keeping your weaker units out of their range. And then when they fly up and commit to being up there because they can't exactly canto back down, then you can dogpile on them and do your thing. Those guys are fine. But there are also 3 Pegasus Knight reinforcements that come in after a few turns. and they're positioned in such a way to really screw you up. They have high movement, high mobility. They can bypass a lot, like they just fly completely around any points that you might be trying to block off with your yellow units. And they can just kill one of your weaker guys. Meg died for me in this chapter, and I didn't bother resetting because, it's Meg. Who cares? I guess Braum, my goat Braum, but he should have trained, should have made sure your daughter had better growth rates. I don't know what to tell you. Now, normally, I'm actually a pretty big fan of the idea of putting in high mobility flying units into a situation where you are restricted by the terrain. It adds an extra layer of challenge that I think can be pretty cool when done well. The problem is that it runs counter to some of the ideas that I was talking about in 3.6, and to some of those ideas that continue on into this map. If the concept here is that we have these weak units, and we're thoroughly outmatched and outnumbered, but we're able to use the terrain to our advantage in interesting ways, then it kind of flips it on its head to have it be like, okay, well, now you have to deal with the terrain at a disadvantage. You're being held back by the structure of the map, and because of the way that they spawn in, their positioning, it's generally just more annoying to deal with them, and I don't care for it very much. One thing that I wanted to mention before moving on, I decided at some point, I don't remember, I think it was after part 1, although not like it really would have mattered. I am planning on training and using Torneo in the tower. It's just been a while since I've done it, so I thought it would be a fun little thing to do. He's good. He's one of the characters whose stats still hold up even from part 1. And it's not like, giving him any extra experience in part 1 would have made much of a difference, since he was getting 2 per kill because he was so over leveled. One thing that I did do was I took Imbue off of Fiona and I gave it to Torneo. Torneo's base magic stat is 12 and his base HP is 38. So he actually gets a third of his health, almost a third of his health back every turn, just by having Imbue equipped on. Which I thought was nice. I thought it was good for his tanking potential, since he's pretty bulky, but he does still take a decent amount of damage from some of the stronger enemies, especially in 3.13 against the tigers and things like that. So it's handy to have a little passive healing on him. It doesn't take particularly long to get to that kill number that the game is looking for, and for the map to end. And we cut to a scene of Micaiah preparing to do something that she's a little bit hesitant about, but she knows that she doesn't have any other choice. She's got to just do it. And so she gives the order to pour oil down on the soldiers and Pegasi down in the valley below, with their plan seemingly being, Sanaki and the Pegasus holding Sanaki will fly up to try to get away, at which point they will shoot her down. Now, I do think people overblow this a little bit. It's certainly it is one of the most brutal things that we see anybody do in these games, much less one of the protagonists, someone we're ostensibly supposed to root for. So I think it shows just how desperate Micaiah is for to succeed here. I think it's interesting that they keep coming back to this well of, if they want to show how ruthless someone is being, they show them trying to light somebody on fire, because they do the same thing with Edelgard in Three Houses. And the characters in the game don't really treat it with the weight of oh my god, she's committing a war crime. I think it's framed as being a pretty brutal tactic, but not something that is this unforgivable horrible thing. It doesn't work anyway. I guess it's probably part of why it's not treated as badly as it could be. Before the plan is able to come to fruition, the remainder of the Laguz Alliance shows up and stops them, essentially. Tibarn, in particular, sweeps through and grabs Soth and is holding him above the ravine. He's flying and just holding Soth dangling in midair. In a moment of, I guess you would say, vulnerability, when Micaiah sees what's happening, she orders a complete stop to the plan. Because even though she's trying to harden herself to do what she has to do for Dane, she's still not willing to sacrifice Soth. She cares for him too much, I guess. Tibarn actually goes a step further. I'm trying to remember the exact order of operations here. I think Ike shows up. Because he was fighting alongside Tibarn. So Ike is here too, and he basically says, surrender now. That's it. End of story. And Micaiah says, no, we can't. And so Tibarn drops Soth. Thankfully, he had Ulki on standby, ready to catch him. So he wasn't actually trying to kill Soth, but it was more like I'm being serious. I will do this if it comes down to it. It's a really cool moment too, where Soth gets, Soth is trying to call out for Micaiah, but he gets cut off mid-sentence because he gets dropped. Tibarn is not fucking around. He's not taking any no half measures or whatever. I guess is kind of a half measure, but point is he's serious. And because Micaiah is, refusing to surrender because she's completely at the mercy of the Senate if she does, then Ike is like, all right. And it seems like they might be about to have a big fight right there and just kind of kill Micaiah, possibly. I don't know how far it would have gone. But Sanaki talks them down and says, no, listen, we'll move on, we'll pull back, let them retreat. Because she really does not want, she's trying to avoid, more so than I think anybody else at this point, Sanaki is trying to avoid fighting with Dane at every possible opportunity, which I think is explained well and lines up fairly well with her character. She does seem a little bit more I don't know what the right word is. She's got a lot less of an attitude in this game than she did in Path of Radiance. I guess part of that is just growing up. But it never really bothered me or strained my suspension of disbelief that she keeps letting Dane go. Or that the Laguz Alliance in general keeps letting Dane go, because, they really don't want to do this. They want to give them the opportunity to change their mind and make peace. And so Micaiah and Soth live to see another day. Ike even asked Torineo, hey, talk some sense into her, will you? And Torineo's like, we can't stop fighting you. So they never really say it. They know, I think, that something is up. They couldn't possibly begin to guess what. But I definitely do think that Ike and some of the others start to get the impression that there is something seriously wrong going on, some sort of mysterious circumstance that's compelling them to act this way. Because I don't know. It definitely comes up a couple times. They're like, what is going on here? They're genuinely confused. So everybody moves on and goes their separate ways. At the end of this, I think the last thing, no, there's a couple things that happen before the end of the chapter. Ike encounters, I believe it's Rayson and Raphael, who I mentioned last episode were coming from Crimea to, or maybe it was Gallia, I don't know, coming to be in Dane with the others. And they give Ike the news that the medallion is looking pretty bad. The medallion, I don't remember how much has come up in this game so far. You might have to think back to Path of Radiance for this one. Leron's medallion supposedly houses, no, it comes, it's come up at some point in part 3, I think. It houses a dark god, allegedly. And if the fires of war embroil the continent, then the Dark God is going to be released. If there's too much chaotic energy in the air caused by war. They mention here again that it's also referred to as the Fire Emblem, giving the Fire Emblem name drop for, I believe, the first time this game. And they basically say, yeah, we're trying our best here to keep it contained with the Galder of, I guess they can sing to it to sort of calm it down a little bit, but it's getting harder and harder to do that. It's starting to not work anymore. So they really need to end this war quickly so that the flames will die back down again. We get a scene in the Dane camp, the Dane side of things, of Almeida calling for somebody. It's not immediately clear who it is, but then it cuts a little bit later. It cuts to a scene of Kurthnaga on the other end of. They're using like some sort of stone to communicate. It gets mentioned later. It's not really that important. The point is that she's calling Kurthnaga to try to come and help. Because Kurthnaga is her brother. I don't know. That's definitely not explicit yet. I think we can probably put the pieces together by now. But yeah, Kurthnaga is Almeida's brother, making her one of the royal family of Goldoa. Interestingly, and so we're gonna see what the follow up of that looks like. And then finally, we're almost done with the chapter, guys. The last thing that happens is that we cut to something going on in Benyon, and it turns out that Zelgius has found out where they're keeping Sephiron, and has gone to break him out of prison, essentially. And that goes swimmingly. The guys guarding him obviously don't stand a chance, and so he frees Sephiron. There's a pretty cool CG of the two of them walking together, and it seems like they are implementing some sort of plan, although we don't know the details of it just yet. So yeah, do you guys see what I'm talking about? Like, I'm trying to summarize every little thing because I think it's all going to be relevant later, so I can't like skip over too much. But yeah, it's just so many little things and it's taken forever, but we'll get there. Hopefully you guys are keeping up. That's the end of the chapter. Let's go ahead and move on to chapter 313, Blood Contract. And yes, the name is actually Blood Contract. I think that's probably where my confusion is coming from, because the name of this chapter is Blood Contract, even though it's called a Blood Pact. I think that might actually be a mistranslation or something. I don't know. It probably should have been called Blood Pact. Anyway, we get an overview of the situation right now. After Zelgius frees Sephiron, word of that travels throughout Benyon. And they're sort of calling for the Benyon citizens to make their choice. Are you going to side with the Senate, or are you going to side with the Apostle? And it seems like predominantly the world is choosing to side with Sanaki, the Apostle. So it's the Dane characters that are talking about this. We're still controlling Dane right now. So they seem to, they're kind of thinking like, can we like take advantage of this somehow? This might be a good opportunity, but it doesn't seem like there's much that they can do, because as long as the Senate is still has the blood pact, then what are they going to be able to do really at the end of the day? And it just so happens that right then, Peleus walks in, and he has found a way, he believes, to break the blood pact. And he tells Micaiah and Torineo and Soth what they have to do, and they're all like, oh no, we can't do this, we have to find another way. They're kind of like tease out what the actual answer is, but it's revealed that what Peleus has discovered is that if he is killed, if they can kill the person who made the blood pact, then the blood pact is broken. So Peleus, with essentially no hesitation, no regrets, whatever, he is willing to sacrifice his life in order to give them a chance at breaking the pact, essentially. Now, what happens next depends on, of all things, whether or not you are playing a file with clear data. If you are not, if this is a fresh save file, then you have two choices, both of which boil down to essentially the same thing. Peleus is asking Micaiah to be the one to kill him. He says, I like you, I respect you, I really appreciate your kind heart, so I want you to be the one to kill me. And Micaiah can either agree to his request or pass the burden off to Torineo. If she just can't go through with it, she can have Torineo do it instead. In either of these scenarios, Peleus dies. He does in fact sacrifice himself in order to break the blood pact. Unfortunately, it doesn't work. The information that Peleus found was incomplete, and by dying, he does not effectively break the blood pact. There is more that they have to do in order to achieve that. We're going to find out what that more is later on. Now, if you are playing on a file with clear data, I don't think there are any other requirements. You just need to play. You need to beat the game once, effectively making this like a new game plus exclusive thing, I guess. Yeah, so that is the only requirement. You have the option to refuse his command entirely, including talking Torneo out of doing it. And if you do this, he becomes a playable character later on in the game. We don't get him right away, but he does. We do unlock him as a playable character in Part 4. I really like this moment from Peleus. Peleus has always been one of my favorite Teleus characters. And even though he's definitely a bit of a chud in parts 1 and a little bit in part 3, I think this moment really cemented him for me as being someone worth taking seriously, as like one of the better characters in the game. The fact that he is so like devastated by the mistake that could potentially cost so many people his lives, or cost so many people their lives, and the lengths he is willing to go to make up for that mistake. But also, right, he's throwing himself so hard into this idea of like, I screwed up, I don't deserve to be Dane's king, like the only way that I can atone for what I've done is by giving my life. Like, he wants so desperately to make up for what he's done that in effect he's kind of running away from the problem, right? Like he's taking the first opportunity to, I guess, make himself feel better about what he did, even if it comes at the cost of his own life. And Micaiah calls him out on that. She says, you got to stop running away from this. And that, that sort of sits with Peleus. And if he lives, then he's around a little bit more in the story later on as well. Although it's not from this point on, where for obvious reasons he stops playing a major role in the story. He actually, if you spare him here, he shows up as an enemy in Part 3 Endgame, interestingly. So we get a little sneak preview of what he can do, but I'm not going to go over him in any amount of detail until we actually get to him as a playable character, which is in next episode, I believe. Oh, there is something else about this scene that I wanted to flag up. It's a little strange. I'm not entirely sure what's supposed to be being communicated here. Micaiah, in order to save Peleus' life, Torneo's about to kill him, but she jumps in front of the attack that Torneo is about to do. I think Peleus gives him like a knife or something to have him do it. So she jumps in front of the knife, and I guess that's the thing, right? Like I don't really understand what happens. It seems like the knife misses, like she just gets really insanely lucky, and the knife just completely misses her. She's not hurt or injured at all. She does still pass out, presumably from like being stressed, or having like a near-death experience, which is fair enough, I guess. But yeah, there's a line here that I think is interesting where she says, maybe the goddess doesn't think that I'm worthy of being a martyr to Dane, or something like that. And then Peleus counters, or maybe she realizes that you're too important to lose right now. Which is a nice little moment for the both of them. But it's a little bit hampered by not being very clear visually what's happening. But I'm pretty sure that what I've described is what I'm supposed to be getting out of this. Okay, so that's the end of the story for right now. We're at the base next. There's a conversation here between Leonardo and Edward that I really like. Leonardo doesn't really do much in it. He's kind of just there. But Edward says, I think that we should leave. I don't want to fight anymore. Let's just leave. And Leonardo says, oh, well, are we going to leave Micaiah and the others behind? And Edward says, oh, no, of course not. We're just going to convince them to come with us. And then maybe we can convince everybody else to stop fighting. And if we convince every person in Dane to stop fighting, then there won't be a war anymore. Which is true and awesome. And Leonardo's like, you know what, Edward, when you're right, you're right. And they say that's a pretty good idea. It's just cute, I like Edward. He's a very, for as little information as we get about him, similarly to Nolan, right? The little that we get is pretty good in my opinion. Not really so much for Leonardo though. Leonardo's pretty whatever. On the Gallia side of things, they are really trying to avoid a conflict here. They keep, issuing requests for peace talks. They keep getting shot down. It's just not working. So they're like, okay, I guess we got to go fight them at Castle Knox, which is sort of their like last line of defense. And that's where this big conflict is going to happen. Before the fights, Nyla and Raphael explain, or they kind of like ask Ike about the situation with Micaiah, because of course they both know Micaiah from part 1, and they want an update sort of on what's going on. And Ike gives them the whole story, and they're like, all right, let's go talk to Micaiah. Maybe we can figure out what the deal is. So they are going to be on the next map in the last few turns as green units. There's not really any gameplay implications to this, other than that there's like a couple talk conversations on the map with, I think, Soth and Volug. But I just wanted to mention it here because it's not really going to come up again. I guess while I'm at it, I might as well talk about the Volug conversation, because the talk between Volug and Nyla here is pretty good. Nyla asks, you have to go online to get this translated, because it's in-game. Volug is speaking the ancient Laguz language. She asks him point blank, why is Micaiah doing this? And he says, the quote is, I believe, Dane's king was tricked into siding with Benyon, more or less. And, Nyla takes that pretty much in stride and says, okay, well, we gotta figure out how to help them. And that's the end of that conversation. But what I find interesting about it is that Volug knows. How? Who told him? Like, he wasn't in the room for any of those conversations, I don't think. So we can only assume that, like, he's just, like, eavesdropping, or maybe, like, Micaiah told him off screen. I don't know. I'm curious. What does he know? The Volug is such a fucking creature. I have so many questions about him. That's part of why I like him so much. The conversation with Soth is worth talking about as well, because Nyla asks Soth to, like, let her, take her to Micaiah, basically, so that they can talk. But Soth says, no, the Dane soldiers aren't comfortable with Laguz. They're going to assume that you're trying to hurt Micaiah. Which is weird, because like we talked about in 3.6, Volug's just around, like, he's hanging out. People are presumably seeing him turn into, his non-wolf, like his humanoid form, and then transforming into a wolf in the middle of the battlefield. I guess what we're supposed to assume is that that's just a gameplay idiosyncrasy, and that in the story he is still just pretending to be a dog. I guess that's what's supposed to be happening, but I don't know. I got nothing on this one, guys. Let me know what you think, I guess. Not to mention, I guess, okay, to be fair, most Dane soldiers probably don't know anything about, like how to differentiate the Laguz. They just assume that, they're all the same or whatever. But some of the Dane soldiers that are currently fighting with Micaiah should remember Nyla being on their side at the end of part 1. Where, again, she could transform and untransform however much she wanted, so they knew she was a Laguz. So, yeah, I don't know. That one's a little bit weird. I'm a bit confused. Okay, those conversations don't come in until way towards the end of the map. I just wanted to get them out of the way because I didn't want to deviate from talking about 3.13 just to mention those couple of conversations. So now that we got those out of the way, let's talk about the map itself. We are stationed at this castle, and it is a unique defend point, I guess, or up to this point in the series, defense maps have always had a specific tile on the map that you have to protect at all costs. In this map, there's like a green like a green glowing line that visualizes where the defend section is, and if any enemy gets across that line, then you lose, you game over. The way this map is structured lends itself well to being a defense map. It incorporates a lot of ledges, which, as I've talked about, are not only some of my favorite mechanics in the entire series, but they work especially well in this context because, as I said in 3.12, they lean into the idea that you are using weak units, right? You were fighting predominantly Laguz again in this map. There are a few other types of enemies, but we'll talk about those later. For the most part, you're going to be fighting cat and tiger Lagus that are locked to one ranged and therefore can't fight up ledges. This means that you can use even some of your completely worthless units like Fiona and Meg, or anybody else that you haven't been training, to body block the ledges and make it so that, the Lagus can't get up, and they can't do anything about it. There are a lot of narrow pathways and choke points that make it easy to prevent the enemy from getting further past you, while also fighting down ledges at, taking pot shots with high damage and accuracy at some of the guys below you. Micaiah is not allowed to leave the defend area. She has to stay behind the line. But at the beginning of the map, she's given a purge tome so that she can shoot at guys from across the map if you still wanted to be able to contribute. There is also a physics staff in the bargain shop this chapter, which I forgot to mention, which I always pick up because it means that she can heal from a distance as well, which is very handy to be able to do in this map. There are enemy reinforcements that try to show up and surprise you from behind your defensive lines. So keep that in mind, and use your body blocking units mindfully. All of this would already be pretty good, but there's one element of the map that I think raises it to an even higher level, and that is the hawks. There are a few hawk Lagus that are in this map as well. And they, if they want to, can just fly straight past your defensive measures and get past the line and immediately game over you. And if they have the opportunity to do that, they will go for it every single time. The only way that you can deal with them is to kill them before they get in range to fly across your line, which is relatively easy to do because you have ballista. That are some of which are operated by, both of which actually are operated by yellow units, although you can take off one of them and put your own archer. If you're using Leonardo, you can put him on one of those ballista as well. But you have to be careful, because if you just let the yellow units do whatever they want the whole time, then they'll actually run out of ballista bolts before all of the hawks are dead. So because they spawn in like periodically, like every few turns. So if you just let them spam those ballista willy-nilly, then they're not going to have enough to deal with the hawks, and you'll have to, either break ranks to go out of your way to kill them, or, just try to find some way to block them, I guess. So it's this really fun, sort of flow of the map where you are in the same way as 3.6, and I would say to an even greater degree than 3.6, you're taking advantage of every tool in your arsenal, every advantage that the layout of the map is giving you, and you have to be, you feel like you're desperately clinging on in this situation where all of the odds are stacked against you. You have to be mindful about how you're using those tools, and it's just such a cool feeling. And not to mention they throw in Bearer of Hope. Bearer of Hope was the map theme for 2E, Alencia's Gambit, and is one of the best map themes in the entire series. I believe this is the only other map in the game that uses it. And I think it fits here, going off the name alone anyway. Bearer of Hope, Micaiah is the last hope for Dane and its people, right? Which I think is pretty fitting. All of this comes together in a way that feels just so cool and satisfying, and it's why, at least at where I'm at in this replay of the series, there's another one that kind of comes close, but I'm just gonna come right out and say it. 3.13 is my favorite map in all of Fire Emblem. I love this map so much, and a lot of it, is personal to me, right? I love ledges, I love defend maps, especially defend maps that make you feel like you're on the back foot and actually, have to go out of your way to play defensively, like this one does, with how weak your units are. I love Bearer of Hope. It's a great song. It's so... playing through this map is always such a joy. It's a highlight of every single playthrough I do of this game, and I just can't get enough of it. I wish I could replay this map, over and over again. This time was a little bit on the easier side. I've been a lot more liberal about using battle saves this time. I used them a lot during this run through of 313, which made the map a lot easier. And I think that probably helped. I think that, like, I would say that hurt the experience a little bit, because it did make things feel a little bit too manageable, I guess. It didn't really feel like I had to think too strategically. I don't really feel bad about using the battle saves, because they're a built-in feature of the game. But I do think they trivialize certain parts that I think are more fun without them. Here's the thing, though. I could just choose not to use them, and I certainly would. I'm not at all averse to intentionally not using mechanics that make the game easier if I think it makes them less fun. I mean, that's why I'm not using Jill. This is another map, by the way, that Jill, like, super trivializes. Because she can deal with the Hawks really easily. She's just so strong that she kind of just doesn't let you feel that sensation of being pushed into a corner in the same way, in my opinion. But back to battle saves. The main reason that I use them, and why I don't like, I don't feel like not. Sorry, I'm a little over the place right now. The main reason I use them is because if I had to redo all of these maps from turn 1 every time, it would just take so fucking long. These maps take forever because of how many enemies there are, how long the animations take. There's an entire, phase of yellow units that you have to go through. I usually just hold still, and I have them hold in place and not do anything, unless I need to have them fire at the Ravens. Although I actually didn't need to have them do that this time. Interestingly, I had Leonardo on one ballista, and then the way the other one moved was like convenient enough for me where I didn't have to do too much to deal with it other than just have Leonardo shoot. But yeah, the next time I play, I'm probably going to commit to not using any battle saves. It just, like, this probably the worst thing about the game, in my opinion, is just how damn tedious it gets with how long the animations take. I really do think that's, like, the game's biggest flaw. Okay, now, there's a couple things about the map that I want to go over before we move on. First of all, I described it as being a defend map, but that's actually only partially true. It might have even been disingenuous to frame it that way, because a pretty common method of beating the map is actually to kill Ike. Just like 2E, there is an optional kill boss clear objective. So if you manage to beat Ike, then the map is over. I don't think that was a smart decision. I think that it kind of undermines the idea, because, like, beating Ike doesn't make the situation of Dane any better. That's for sure. Right, like, they're still crazy outnumbered. There's still, like, a bunch of incredibly powerful enemy generals on, the side of the Laguz Alliance. So just taking down specifically Ike for a battle is not really going to accomplish very much. But you can do it. Some people like to set this up because Ike will just have whatever equipment is given to him at the end of 311. So some people like to give Ike a bronze sword so that he can do as little damage as possible, and maybe they can gang up on him with, like, Jill or a couple others. I don't really know what the main method is, but you can do it. I think Jill is, like, a trained Jill is probably the most effective way of going about it. You just got to be careful, I guess. But I've never done that before. Not only do I think that that's boring and trivializes, my favorite map in the entire series, but it's also just, like, really hard. So I don't really think that that's an effective method for me anyway. And then, of course, what conversation about 313 would be complete without talking about the famous 313 Archer? 313 Archer is one of the yellow units. Specifically, he is the sniper on the ballista on the left. Because if you're playing through the chapter, like, pretty casually, you may just let him use up all his ballista bolts, at which point he goes over to the so there's some Lagus that spawn in near him, as one of those, like, oh, they're trying to catch you off guard by spawning behind you type of deal. If he's out of ballista bolts at that point, he will literally jump down and start fighting those Lagus down there, which is pretty sick. Apparently he does pretty well for himself down there as well, which I totally believe. The yellow units in this chapter are pretty goated. Everyone loves the 313 Archer, but my personal pick for favorite yellow unit in this chapter are the two generals in front of Micaiah's, like the ledge immediately leading up to the line. Those guys are goated. Those guys can hold the line really well, even getting attacked from like 3 sides at once. Yeah, I mean, that's about it. I think I felt like I would have more to say about it because, of how much I love it. But I think my main points about why I love 313 are similar to why I like 3.6, and I went over that in pretty extensive depth. So you can apply a lot of those same arguments to 313. Just kind of enhance them, right? Because it's not Fog of War, it's not a swamp, right? It's a defend map, which is my favorite, my favorite type of map in the series. It definitely wasn't as much fun for me on this playthrough as it has been in some previous playthroughs, because I think I got a little cheesy with it. I think my team for this one was a lot stronger than it normally is. I played, a little bit boringly, I would say. So, but next time I play through, I will definitely make sure to appreciate the map for all it's worth. All right, let's see. A lot happens at the end of this one, guys. One thing I forgot to mention, actually, just as an aside, the Grail mercenaries will show up and participate in the fight. Only in the last couple of turns, around the same time that Nyla shows up, actually. We got Titania, Oscar, Mia, Mist, Gatry, Shinon, and Rolf, and Boyd. All of them just pop in and start making their way over to you, but usually they don't actually even make it to me before, at least make it to any of my blue units before the map is over, because they show up pretty late. So anyway, at the end of the chapter, we find out that Dane is losing. The defensive line is getting pushed back. They can't hold it anymore. They need to retreat inside of the castle. And Ranulf, and we cut to Ranulf and Ike, who are, trying to break down the door or whatever. And Ranulf says, "Listen, Ike, the battlefield chaos is getting so strong right now that my guys are going ballistic. If they find Micaiah, they are going to kill her. Like, I cannot stop them." And Ike doesn't want that to happen. I guess he promised, I don't know, somebody said something about, like, please let me talk to Micaiah. I think it was Nyla and Raphael. And Ike promised them that he would let Micaiah live so that they could talk to her. So he's kind of hoping that doesn't happen. Just when it seems like things are going to tip over the edge and it's going to be too late, something happens. We cut to Janaf and Ulki, who were, like, just kind of looking over the horizon, scouting things out, and they're like, "Hey, what's that in the distance? What's coming out? What's coming at us from over there?" And it turns out that what's coming at them is a black dragon. One of the black dragon Lagus, of which we only know two in existence, Degencia and Kurthnaga. Based on the context from earlier in the story, we can probably assume it's Kurthnaga. He shows up and starts, firing laser blasts and all that, to try to get people to stop fighting. Ina and Alencia are there as well. I guess they met up along the way, and they diffuse tensions enough to get people to stop fighting for the time being, anyway. Jesus Christ, we got a lot to get through. Okay, so I'm gonna cut to the short versions on a lot of these. Kurthnaga meets up with Almeida and Micaiah and decides that he's going to join up with them. There's a very funny scene from Ike later where he finds out that Kurthnaga is joining up with them, and he's like, "Oh, this is just great." So he's gonna fight on their side. In addition to that, Nyla and Raphael finally are able to talk with Micaiah, and offer her the opportunity to explain to them what's going on. And this is kind of dipping into the beginning of next chapter, but I'll just say here, they have decided to fight alongside her as well. So she's got a few new people bolstering her ranks, including a black dragon, and the queen of the wolves, who is extremely strong, and one of the heron tribes. So I think this is a really cool moment from all the characters here, and something that, again, I think the blood contract is really the only way that'd be able to make this work, right? Giving Micaiah a really compelling reason to fight, basically giving her no choice in the matter, makes it a lot more believable to me that these people would be willing to defect and side with her, out of love and wanting to protect her, than if she was just fighting for, the fighting out of a more nebulous concern for Dane, right? There's a scene between Almeida and Kurthnaga. It just reveals that they're siblings. We already knew that, or at least I think this is where it's made explicit for the first time, but it's been pretty heavily implied up to this point. Yeah, okay, that's the quick stuff out of the way. There are two things that I want to spend a little bit of time on talking about here. First of all, the reason that Alincia is here, Lucia is also accompanying her, by the way. They're here because Bastion has apparently gone missing. He was giving them fairly frequent updates on the situation in Dane, but then after a while he said that he was looking into something that was important for Crimea, and then just stopped giving updates. So they're out here looking for Bastion, essentially, and that's something I wanted to flag up because it's going to come back later. The other major thing that I wanted to talk about is they finally confront Almeida. They put two and two together, Almeida seems to know more about the blood pact than the rest of us do. Let's press her for information and see if we can get anything out of her. And the short answer is yes, they do. They find out that in order to break the blood pact, they need two things. One, at least one of the people that is a part of the pact, that the pact is made with, must be dead. And then the second thing is the destruction of the physical document itself. So that's why killing Peleus doesn't break the blood pact. It's because in addition to killing Peleus, they would also need to physically destroy the piece of paper that the contract is written on. And they explore, or they talk about the idea that okay, well, if we can get the document, then we can also probably just kill Lacane, right? Because we don't have to kill Peleus, we can kill Lacane instead. So that seems to be what their plan is at this point, is find a way to destroy the paper and kill Lacane. But they don't have any way to do that, so they're still kind of up shit creek without a paddle. Almeida goes into some detail about how Ashnerd used the blood pact to basically kill all of the people ahead of him in line for the throne. We don't really need to go into that since we've talked about it a little bit at this point, and it's pretty straightforward, right? He tricked his dad into signing a blood pact. That's really all it was. I jumped around a little bit there. That wasn't all in sequential order, but that should have been the main bullet points for post chapter 313. I think I got everything. Hopefully that wasn't too confusing. I think you guys got the gist, though. Okay, that should be everything. So let's go ahead and move on to our last chapter for today. Chapter 3-E, or 3-Endgame, From Pain, Awakening. Okay, now there is one thing I wanted to talk about at the base, which is one of the base conversations between Rolf and Shinon. I believe the title of the conversation is Master and Pupil. And I mean, the conversation itself is pretty straightforward. It's just Rolf and Shinon talking about, the growth that Rolf has made and Shinon's sort of role that he's taken on as his teacher. And it's just really interesting to me because this is, I think, other than the conversation in FE9 where Shinon gets drunk off his ass, I think this is literally the only time where we see Shinon show a little bit more of his humanity, a little bit emotional vulnerability, and some nuance to his character, which I just think is cool, right? It's not anything groundbreaking or mind-blowing or whatever, but it's a nice conversation, and really cements Shinon as this sort of like layered character that I enjoy quite a bit, even if he is, still at the end of the day pretty much a piece of shit. I think it's cool how Rolf is this person that he feels like he can let down his walls around, and that he can just be like open and honest with. I mean, he still definitely has an energy to him in this conversation, where he's trying to like play things off and be a little bit of a jackass. But he says stuff like, hold on, let me look up some exact quotes. Yeah, so he says stuff like, "You've been running around camp with that silly grin plastered on your face, but I can tell all the fighting's wearing you down. I can't help you get a good night's sleep or make you eat your vegetables, but I can see that you're using a decent bow." And then Rolf feels bad because he can't pay Shinon back for all the help that he's given him, and Shinon says, "Did I ever ask you to pay me back? Did I ever tell you my help had any strings attached? No. Kids should just be kids and learn from their elders. If you want to pay me back, then be better than me. Doesn't matter if it's at using a bow or making one, just do it better. Then I can point at you and tell people that's the best student I ever had." And it's like a completely different fucking guy from the Shinon we've been seeing in basically every other instance up to this point, right? And I think it just goes to show, I mean, it's definitely been implied throughout, this game and the previous one, that Rolf is sort of like brings out the best in Shinon, but I think this is the only time where we see it so directly, and I just think that's cool. I'm a pretty big fan of Shinon in general, and then this interaction specifically. There is another base conversation here that I want to mention, not because I think it's particularly interesting, but because it's one of the few that's locked behind like special conditions other than just the included characters being alive. In this case, it's a base conversation between Mist and Boyd, and in order to unlock it, you need to have an A support between the two characters. I actually completely forgot about this, or maybe I didn't even know it existed in the first place. I'm pretty sure I knew about it at some point, but it just slipped my mind, I guess. I didn't. The only reason I even remembered it is because I was watching the Don 0% growth videos that he's doing on Radiant Dawn right now, and he mentioned getting a spirit dust in one of the base conversations, and I'm like, what is he talking about? So I had to go look it up, and yeah, you do get a spirit dust from this base conversation, if you unlock it, which is nice. I've gone on record saying the spirit dusts aren't all that good in this game, but they're still nice to have, especially if you're planning on using. So there is some there's one magic unit in particular that joins a little bit later on, that I think is maybe worth using the spirit dust on, but we'll see. I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get there. The conversation itself isn't anything to write home about. It's just Boyd basically saying that he's going to protect Mist, etc. They do have a paired ending together, a romantic paired ending, so that's neat. Okay, now we can go ahead and get into the map proper. There's a couple things to note here right at the start. Despite Lucia and Alencia being here in universe, they decide to just stay back at the base and are not playable in this map for some reason, even though I think it would make perfect sense for both of them to be. But nope, you can't use either of them again until part 4, so fuck you. Two characters who are just begging for any crumbs of availability. Easiest layup in the world to give them an extra chapter here, but they just don't go for it for whatever reason. Sigrun is still forced here for some reason. So is Ranulf, although that one makes a little bit more sense, I guess. They're required deploys, and I don't entirely get why. It doesn't really make that much of a difference. But yeah, regardless of who you choose to deploy, the goal here is the same. It's listed as a route map, but that's actually not correct. It's not a route map. Instead, you're going to notice when you start playing, there is a big glowing blue number in the corner of the screen. And what that number represents is the number of units who have died total on the map. That includes red units, it includes green units, because there's a ton of green units in this chapter. There's a squad of Beast Lagoos led by Skrimir, and a squad of Bird Lagoos led by Tibarn. So it counts those deaths as well. It even counts your own blue unit deaths as being part of this total. And every time it ticks up, as it goes by, there's a number of different story scenes that we'll talk about a little bit in a minute. But the ultimate goal of the chapter is to get that number to 80. That will cause the chapter to progress and clear part 3. This chapter is where we're seeing sleep staves being used by the enemy for, I believe, the first time in the game. We actually got access to a sleep staff ourselves in, I think, the previous chapter, or maybe it was 312, one of them. It doesn't really matter. I didn't even bring it up because the sleep staff is kind of mid in this game. I don't think it's very good. Don's been using it for a couple of his 0% clears. There's a reason I haven't been watching a lot of Radiant Dawn videos. I always like to avoid watching content about a game I'm talking about for the podcast, just because I don't want to accidentally, subconsciously steal any ideas or repeat anything, take credit for ideas that aren't my own. But I caved and started watching the Don videos, and now I'm not going to be able to stop thinking about them. But yes, the sleep staff in this game, generally speaking, for a casual playthrough, is pretty worthless. So I didn't bring it up until now. But when the enemy is using them, of course it zeroes in and hits 100% of the time. No, I'm just kidding. The one that was used against me here hit, but I had a restore staff that I was able to use to heal Ike, which is good. Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty straightforward map. The enemies here aren't, like, super strong. It's kind of just, like, a big, your army clashing against their army and kill as many guys as possible in as short a time as possible to get through it. There were no bonus experience turn limits for the previous 2 maps. The defend chapters don't usually have them, so 313, makes sense to not have one. I don't really know why there's not one for 312, but yeah, I guess it doesn't really matter. This one is 10 turns for full, 15 turns for half. There is, for the first time in a while, a really, really useful item here as one of the hidden items that you can find on just a random tile in one of the maps. Or just some random tile on the map. And it is a rescue staff. Now, I'm going to be honest with you guys. I don't know if I even knew that there was a rescue staff in this game. Or at least I don't know if I've ever gotten it before. Because, they're annoying to get, and deploying Heather, bringing Heather all the way out here in the middle of a bunch of enemies, it wasn't really that hard once I actually put my mind to it, because you just clear out all the enemies, and for the most part, it's, like, not even a big deal. But, yeah, I don't usually get this rescue staff, so I'm curious to see how it'll go for me, how using it will work out, because... the rescue staff is really useful. It's a really handy movement tool that is definitely not as powerful as the warp staff, but it can be used to similar effect in the right hands, which is pretty cool. I enjoy using the rescue staff in other games, so I'll probably put it on like Alencia or something here, maybe Micaiah. I think Alencia makes the most sense because it's probably going to get most use in either for the Izuka map 4-5, I think, 4-5. And then the tower, if I bring Alencia to the tower, which I'm still planning to, it might get some use there as well, because there's some kill boss maps that are, it's good to be able to have that movement utility. Okay, yeah, pretty straightforward map as far as the gameplay goes, which is good, because it gives me plenty of time to talk about the various things that are happening in the story. So I'm going to go through all the scenes, and talk about them a little bit. Some of them I might skate through a little bit, fast. Something to keep in mind is that all of these scenes are happening during the battle. It's every time the chaos counter in the corner reaches a certain threshold. I think it's like 5 and then 10 and then it's every 5 for a little bit, and then there's like a little bit more of a gap in between. So yeah, let's just go through those scenes real quick. We see a scene of Nesala talking with Sanaki. No idea what that's about yet. She seems to have him under his employ, and has been keeping it like under wraps from the others. But he's here now, and is basically she's ordering him around and telling him to protect her, which he is reluctantly doing, although he's given her some attitude about it. The next scene we see is of Leanne. We were told that she was keeping an eye on the medallion, trying to keep it under control. We see that she's just completely unconscious. The power of the medallion seemingly was too much for her, and she just passed out and is lying on the ground next to it. After a little bit, after the counter gets a little bit higher, we see Micaiah across on the other side of the battlefield. She starts talking like she hears someone calling to her and giving her like directions to do something. And she just sort of wanders off the battlefield, and Soth, follows after her. And then finally, the note that the chapter ends on, or that the battle ends on, I guess, is after 80 deaths, Ike receives word that Mist has collapsed, is just completely unconscious. So Ike and some of the other prominent members of the army sort of break away from the battlefield to go and check up on the situation, since things seem to be getting a little bit out of hand with the medallion. There's a couple of interactions here. Most notably, Tibarn is understandably very pissed that Nesala is here. And the only reason that he doesn't just try to kill him right then and there is because Sanaki basically tells him to put their differences aside for a second, because they have bigger things to worry about, which is the medallion seemingly going haywire. It's at this point that Micaiah and Soth just wander into Ike and the rest of them, and they're like, "Oh, hi, what's up?" But everyone collectively agrees to put the whole Dane versus Lagus thing on hold for a second to figure out how they're going to deal with the medallion. Mist, through her sort of half-conscious state, insists to everybody that in order to solve the problem, figure out what's going on, they need to sing the Galder of Release. And everyone's a little bit nervous about that, because of course singing the Galder of Release is going to wake up the Dark God, apparently. But they all seem to agree that based on how things are going, the Dark God is probably going to break out of the medallion anyway. So if there's even a chance that what Mist is saying will work, they need to take it, basically. And so Sanaki sings the Galder of Release, or at least she attempts to. All she has is the melody. She doesn't actually have the lyrics to the song. It sounds like she doesn't even know that there are lyrics. So she sings the melody, but it doesn't work. It's at this point, I got a little ahead of myself earlier. It's at this point that Micaiah and Soth show up. And Micaiah somehow, I don't remember, I know why this is, I don't remember when it's explained, but Micaiah, after hearing Sanaki sing the Galder of Release, the melody for the song, she suddenly realizes that she knows what the lyrics are. And so she sings the full song with the melody and the lyrics together, which does successfully wake up the Dark God. And yeah, we'll see a little bit more about that later. Before then, though, we cut to a scene with Sephiron at the foot of some mysterious woman who we don't know. He talks a little bit about a promise that was made to this woman, and says that people kept it for a very short time. He says that they kept their promise for 200 years at best. When it was supposed to be 1,000 years or something like that. And Sephiron tells this woman that, in his opinion, there's no reason to wait to deliver her judgment to the world, basically. And she says, okay, well, I'll do that then. We cut back to the other group, and everything seems to be chilling out. Things are getting back to normal. A little bit of a calm settles in. Rayson wakes back up. Miss wakes back up. And they talk, a little bit. Soth goes to see, how Micaiah's doing. It turns out that there is now somebody possessing Micaiah's body. And she says, I'm not Micaiah. She's sleeping right now. But before she can elaborate any further, we get a cutscene where this mysterious woman who I don't know if it says her, Yune says her name. The person possessing Micaiah says her name is Ashera. Ashera delivers her judgment, which seems to be a giant laser beam shooting from the sky that turns every single person on the battlefield, and as we find out later, in the entire world, to stone. They become solid stone statues, except for, I guess, the strongest people in the world, which just so happens to be all the playable characters from Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn, as well as a couple other people like Mustan and Amy and the two brothers, basically just as an excuse to have shops and forging available, which is fair enough. I guess it's a gameplay consideration, but it's a little bit silly. The explanation given is that everybody inside the building was safe from the judgment beam. I am getting a little bit ahead of myself, I think, because I dipped into the beginning of next chapter a little bit, but that's the gist. Yeah, so Ashera has delivered her judgment onto the world and turned everybody into statues. We're gonna learn more about sort of what that means, why this all happened, in the next chapter. But for now, that's where we'll leave it. There is the cutscene that plays right before Ashera's judgment comes down. Is pretty cool. I skipped over it a little bit just to make sure I was talking about things that were related to each other. There's a scene between Skrimir and Ranulf that I think is pretty cool. They just talk a little bit about what life after the war will look like, what comes after all the fighting is done. And Skrimir admits that, he doesn't feel confident in being able to navigate what comes after the fighting. Basically, fighting is what he's good at, but what comes afterwards, the diplomacy part of it is difficult for him, which I think is a nice moment for him. And we're gonna see. Well, I don't know how much more we're gonna see from Skrimir in terms of story. But at the very least, he's going to become playable in the next episode, spoilers, and I'm very excited for that because I really like using Skrimir. I think he's a very fun unit. So anyway, that's the end of the chapter and the end of part 3. We only have one more part of Radiant Dawn to get through, guys. We're getting pretty close to the end here. We get that preview cutscene for the next part, just like we did for all the other ones, and it's called Gods and Men, I think, is the name of part 4. So we'll talk more about that later. Now that we're at the end of a part, I did want to to give a little bit of attention to the story here as well. I mean, a lot of what I have to say about part 3's story, I've already given you guys in this episode, because this is where the majority of plot reveals and plot details come out about the main conflict of part 3. But I think just to kind of give an overview of how I feel about it overall, I think it's a really good I think it's a really good conflict, right? As much as I think the blood contract is certainly contrived, I think that what it was building up to, and how it was being built up to, I guess, more so, all the stuff with Ike and the Laguz Alliance, and Micaiah having to put her faith in Peleus, even though she has no idea what's going on, being willing to play the bad guy, right, because she believes it's what's best for Dan. It feels a little bit redundant to talk about because, we've had him for 5 entire episodes now. But keeping in mind that, right, this chunk of the story is where we finally get to play as Ike again and see a little bit about what's been going on with him, see his character interactions again. It's been really nice, and I've been enjoying this part of the story a lot. I think it is probably my least favorite section of the story so far, just because I really, really like part 2. Part 2 is definitely my favorite so far, and then part 1, I like part 1. I think part 1 has a really tight story that's pretty well handled. Actually, you know what? I think story-wise, I think I probably do enjoy part 3 more, just because I like Micaiah in part 1 a lot. I think some of the trials that she has to go through the character development that she goes through in part 1, seeing Soth alongside her, talking through some of these decisions with her, I think it's all good. But there's just something about the way that the climax is built up to in part 3 that I think it just feels really satisfying, and not to mention getting Ike back, as I said, is a really, certainly gives it a boost as well. I don't remember being particularly fond of the story or the gameplay in part 4, to be honest with you guys. Definitely, I think the story, I remember, still liking the story. But the gameplay, less so. So we'll see how I feel about these upcoming chapters. Speaking of which, we're going to be doing chapters 4P, 4.1, and 4.2. So the first 3 chapters of part 4, one for each of the different groups, which we'll talk about the different groups later. But yeah, okay. That's it from me in terms of Radiant Dawn. Fortune's Weave news is like fucking everywhere right now. It feels like we have a ton of information about the game already, even though it's an entire month before it comes out. I know that game journalists have been getting like review codes and things like that, preview codes. I think that the preview codes that they've gotten have only been for like small portions of the game. But we've been getting a lot of reporting out on some of the details of the game. Honestly, in my opinion, maybe even a little bit too much. Like, I think considering we're still a full month away from release, there's very little that we don't know about the game at this point, which is a little bit disappointing. I think it's I'm not normally the type of person that's like bothered by, thorough knowledge of a game going into it, but I'm worried about what the next month is going to bring if we're already to this extent. But we'll see, I guess. Hopefully it won't be so bad. I'm going to take a look because the front page of Serenus Forest is probably like a fucking nightmare right now. It's actually not that bad. There hasn't been too much that they've decided to post about since the direct. There's only been a couple things. They did a lot of like the character introductions leading up to the direct that we were getting. We were getting information about like Fabio and Tobias, I guess, is one of them. Yeah. Anyway, I still remain very excited, despite not loving everything that we're learning about the game. Like, for example, we recently found out that you're only going to have one save slot to play through the game. I mean, it's a Switch game, right? So you can do like a different profile and everything. So that's nice, I guess, but still very confusing for a series that's never really had that issue before. At all. I think even any like FE1 on the NES had like 2, I think, something like that. That game did come out in 1990, I guess. So for what that's worth, but yeah, I don't know, very strange decision. But here we are, I guess. I'm still looking forward to the game though. And yeah, I think that's where I'll leave it. I don't really have anything else to talk about that I'm particularly interested in right now. So we'll stop it there. And I'll make sure to put in the responses of the question in post because I did get a few since I started recording the episode a few days ago. So yeah, I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.